приветствовать вас. Уважаемые участники, мы рады приветствовать вас на 14-й тематической параллельной сессии первой конференции по образовательной политике и инновации. Я бы хотела дать вам в течение того времени, пока мы подключаем других участников, я бы хотела дать вам несколько напоминаний о технических деталях, прежде чем мы перейдем к презентациям. Обратите внимание, что все микрофоны отключены. По возможности мы просим вас держать камеру включенной, так как это создает более дружескую атмосферу. Мы записываем это событие, и все записи будут опубликованы в открытом доступе. Обратите внимание, что доступен синхронный перевод на русский и английский язык. Если вам нужна помощь, чтобы его настроить, пожалуйста, напишите нам. Также мы просим вас изменить свое имя в окне участников, чтобы мы также создали хорошую дружескую атмосферу и знали, кто откуда. Также просим вас представиться в чате, и в случае технических проблем вы можете написать мне личное сообщение в чате. Если у вас будут технические трудности, у нас на странице программы конференции есть ссылка на группу поддержки в WhatsApp или техническую комнату поддержки Zoom. Также у нас будет сессия вопросов и ответов после презентации. Задавая вопросы, указывайте свое имя, фамилию и страну. И также следите за нами в Twitter, KicksAP, и делитесь мероприятием с помощью официального хэштега KicksEpic. И теперь я передаю слово нашему модератору, Элизабет, и желаю всем продуктивной конференции.
Is it over to me, Veronica? Okay. Good morning, or sorry, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to day 4 of the KicksEpic conference. My name is Elizabeth Cassidy. I am the chair for this session, and I'm a senior research fellow at the Australian Council for Educational Research. This parallel session 14, the theme is 21st century teaching and learning. So our first presenter will be Yulia Mikhailova, who is an assistant professor at ADA University, and her presentation focuses on regional monitoring report on the situation with inclusive education in Central and Eastern Europe, the Caucasus, and Central Asia. Our second presentation will be Ian Teo, a research fellow from the Australian Council for Educational Research. And the title of his presentation is Integration of 21st Century Skills in Education. Our third presenter will be Bahadur Mengdiev, Head of Investment at Gayoor. His presentation is titled The Advanced Training of Teachers based on the competence-based approach of teaching in secondary schools of the Republic of Tajikistan. And our final and fourth presenter will be Angelika Chepelenko, docent of the Department of Enterprises, Economy and Management at the Ukrainian Engineering and Pedagogical Academy. Her presentation title is Prospects of the Market of Educational Services. So some very quick housekeeping. Each of our presenters, the presentations has 15 minutes plus 5 minutes of discussion after your presentation. Regardless, it is 20 minutes in total. If you go, I will tell you to stop before your time is up. So there will be an opportunity to ask questions after the presentation. Please put your questions and comments in the chat. At the end, if we have time, we can have a general discussion and question and answer session. So thank you very much, everyone. I'm looking forward to hearing all of these presentations. And so I welcome our first presenter.
Спасибо большое.
I work at Ada University Baku, Azerbaijan. I would like to present part of a global monitoring report on inclusive education in the region of Eastern Europe, the Caucasus and Central Asia. I will present the part of the report related to inclusive assessment. There was a technical issue. In 2008, the European Conference on Inclusive Education defined what is an inclusive assessment. It is an approach to assessment in mainstream schools in which educational policies and practices promote the fullest possible learning outcome for all students, with the view that it is essential that all students are given opportunities to demonstrate progress and achievement in learning. Assessment procedures should be complementary and coordinated to support teaching and learning and should not lead to segregation by labeling students according to their level of achievement. Also, students should have the right to reliable and efficient assessment procedures that are flexible enough to accommodate their special educational needs. Assessment and inclusion should not be perceived as conflicting. This is one of the requirements for development of inclusive education. Mainly in regions, there are a framework for assessment that governs the assessment for all students. This is the case in 27 countries of 30. There are countries in which assessment is regulated at the level of national curricula, such as in Georgia, but in Lithuania, the schools themselves determine how students should be assessed at the local level. This is approved by school director and applied in practice. Analysis of the survey results in the region demonstrated that summative assessment still dominates in the region. Its results serve to make important decisions about child. For example, if the child should be enrolled in a regular school, in a special school, in inclusive or segregated educational institutions. In this regard, according to the results of the analysis, countries in the region are moving towards a more balanced assessment system.
Summative assessment shows the result in the end of the studies. It doesn't allow to respond quickly to educational needs of students with special educational needs. Due to that, countries of the region are moving for more positive system of education. Formative education is used in Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan. New procedures are being developed to use formative assessment. In Lithuania, teachers are required to use formative assessment in practice. In Serbia, this formative assessment is used more for talented students with special needs as talented students. In general, formative assessment is very important in order to help students to demonstrate their progress and to show their achievements. A study was conducted in Northern Macedonia that showed that formative assessment with a focus at permanent monitoring has the biggest impact at raising achievements of the students. In general, talking about inclusive assessment, all countries of the regions could be divided into two groups. There are countries in which there are national frameworks of assessment. The rules are regulated at first at national level, but there are countries that have no national levels, and they can get adapted at the local level, at a local level of school, like in Belarus. Some countries like Armenia, students with special needs are assessed on the basis of individual learning plan. It's done by a team of experts that jointly assess the progress of a child and decide what teaching strategy should be used for this particular child. Mainly in our region, existing rules of assessment differentiate children only on the basis of special needs of disability. So some disability limitations. But there are countries in the region who differentiate more versatility. In Russia, there are special rules of assessment for students children from migrant families. In Belarus, also law for children of migrants, and Bosnia and Herzegovina. They have bigger versatility. They take into account gender, ethnic origin, native language of instruction. In Hungary, also differentiation at the level of social and economic status of a student. At the level of the final school tests, needs of children from ethnic minorities are not taken into account. In Kazakhstan, for instance, final exams of school graduates who studied in Uyghur, Uzbek language, they have tests in their language. In Russia, although there are many schools with ethnic language of instruction, final exams are still conducted in Russian. That does not allow students to demonstrate in full their achievements. It was found that in the region, assessment still remains a kind of filter for the children to be selected to study in ordinary school. Countries use broad range of different opportunities to adapt existing summative tests for students with special needs. For instance, in some countries, written tests are conducted instead of oral tests. In Hungary, for instance, students can choose the subject for their final examinations. In some countries like Bulgaria, Kazakhstan, Ukraine, Azerbaijan, Students with special needs are provided help, consultant teachers or teacher's assistant. Also, students with special needs are provided with special access premises, especially if they have problems with the movement. Duration of exam can differ. In Hungary, when students with special need take exam, it is 1 hour longer. In Azerbaijan, half an hour longer. In Kazakhstan, bigger breaks are made. In some other countries, they use specially prepared examination materials and tests. These examination materials could be printed with Braille text or with big font for the students to understand the content easier. It is expected that more and more information computer technologies will be used to raise the quality of assessment. Such expectation exists in the entire region. At least in half of the countries of the regions, they use computer technologies, both at final tests and intermediate exams. These examples of computer technologies are different. Speech synthesizers, formatting of texts for students with visual impairment, tests in Braille font, big font, speech synthesizer. In Slovenia, they use special computer platform for such students that is using psychometric tests and collect information about learning of a child in the course of entire process of learning. What our analysis of policy and practice of inclusive assessment showed? There are 3 very positive trends that we notice. All countries in the region show very serious trend. Assessment is moving to inclusive assessment. All is done to achieve that. Governments of countries in the region adopt legislation, change and improve legislation, including legislation, policy and practice regarding inclusion education, in order that objectives of inclusion are provided to all students. Apart from that, in all countries of the region, special needs of students are recognized, are assessed in order to provide additional support to a student. These are all very positive trends. However, still problems remain. Such key issues as why inclusive assessment should be used, how this inclusive assessment could be applied. These questions remain. And when assessing achievement of students, inclusion is not sufficient to take into account. Therefore, it is necessary to continue supporting efforts of school and teachers to use assessment as instrument of planning and application of effective teachers and learning to ensure participation of all students in learning process. This is the end of my presentation.
Thank you very much, Olivia. And thank you as well for sticking so well to time. That gives us about 5 minutes for questions. So I open up the floor. Please enter your questions in the chat. Maybe while we're waiting for people to type their ideas, I have one question. I was very interested, Dr. Oria, at the end. what do you think what is the biggest challenge for inclusive formative assessment and inclusive education? Yeah, one of the biggest challenges that comes out of your report.
I think still this long-lasting tradition of having summative assessment and formative assessment is still not included in the policy of education in some countries in the region at the level of the policy, and at the level of practice, it's not well elaborated, and teachers are lacking clear guidelines how to do this. So probably more professional development for teachers for how to conduct formative assessment and how to use it to improve instruction and to support education of children with disabilities is still a challenge. And I just would like to give example from my own country. In our country, formative assessment was included as a requirement for teachers for more than 10 years ago. And teachers, they were resisting this because they thought that it takes too much of time. It's difficult to define the progress. It's difficult to record and document. So that is a challenge.
I'm looking at the questions in the chat, and one is, I know the presentation was not about that, but can we elaborate on formative assessment?
Yes, but I have one more question in Russian. It's about criteria for evaluating and assessing results of education. You know, the most important with inclusive assessment, that it does not lower expectations of students or pupils. So the same, the standard curriculum standards. So they are remain for all children. The only requirement with inclusive assessment to make reasonable adaptations so students can demonstrate the progress in education. And Yuri Skuba asked, what are the criteria? Actually the same, sorry, it was the same question in Russian and English. So not lowering expectations, that is the main issue, requirement. Yeah, thank you for the question. So the question is, has the COVID pandemic changed the students with special needs are assessed and monitored? You know, for this particular report, we were not asking specific questions about COVID, but we had a second report about COVID influence on assessment and monitoring. And mainly, that was the main challenge for pandemic affecting education of children with special needs, because the move to online education was to some extent managed well in the region, but this assessment for online learning, according to answers from many countries in the region, was remaining as a challenge, especially formative assessment.
Do we have any other questions? There is initially the first one that can we elaborate on formative assessment? I don't know if you want to address that in any further way.
Can we elaborate? You mean the formative assessment is Probably about definition, how we define formative assessment. It is a way of collecting data about collecting evidences about student progress in the process of education, while summative provides assessment results data about student progress at the end of teaching unit or period. Formative assessment is valuable because it provides data throughout the process of education and gives the teacher enough information to adjust to improved instruction to better meet particular needs of learners.
Thank you very much. I hope that answered the question earlier in the chat. The timing is perfect. I want to thank you very, very much, Yuvia, and I'd like to go on to our second presentation now. Ian Teo from the Australian Council for Educational Research.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Okay. Is that coming up okay?
Yes, yep.
Yes, okay, thank you. Right, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. My name's Ian. I'm from the Australian Council for Educational Research, and I'll be obviously talking today on behalf of my colleague as well, Claire Schooler, on the integration of 21st century skills in education systems. So a bit of information about what this talk is going to be about. It's actually the presentation of, I suppose, experiences that we've had while delivering two KICS EAP Hub learning cycles in the course of this year, I think in June and August this year. And important to note is that people who participated in this course were policymakers, researchers, teachers, and NGO stakeholders as well. And the key theme across each of these individuals was the fact that they were all invested in some shape and form with regards to integrating 21st century skills into education systems. Okay, so that's the context which I'll be talking about today. So first things first, I won't go through all the words because there are quite a few, but the take-home message is that with 21st century skills, it's obviously been quite an interest area for policymakers over the last 21 years or so. But what's important to note, of course, is that 21st century skills are not located only within the 21st century. They've been around for thousands of years, but I suppose in the lead up to the 21st century, these skills became much more popular, certainly within education systems. So when we think about education systems and how they might integrate 21st century skills, it's important to consider the fact that, as we all know, education systems are very complex, and integrating 21st century skills into these systems will involve an alignment across curriculum, assessment, and pedagogy. And I'll come back to these three components fairly regularly. But that's essentially, I suppose, what we're trying to do here. We want to ensure that if we are going to integrate 21st century skills into education systems, then there has to be an alignment across the curriculum aspects, the assessment aspects, and also the pedagogical aspects. And indeed, many countries are seeking viable options to integrate these skills into their systems. So this is an example of a study that we've done with officials and teachers across 20 these officials and teachers had with regards to discussing collaboration within their groups. As you can see there are some interesting comments. You know, one individual said, "I always thought the most vocal student in the class was perhaps the best collaborator, but now I see that collaboration," I'm paraphrasing here, "also involves listening and absorbing important information." Another individual talked about the fact that, "I only thought of two aspects or two components of collaboration, but now I realize that collaboration actually involves many more components." So I think, once again, the take-home message is that the complexity involved in discussing, conceptualizing, discussing 21st century skills is actually quite contested. And these are issues that stakeholders and certainly teachers have had to grapple with. There seems to be a contested understanding of 21st century skills, and indeed there are significant knowledge gaps there. So ACR's approach has been, of course, to identify what the needs are and then to subsequently develop resources around these needs. The needs, as we can see, are to develop understanding, to monitor growth, and to ensure alignment across curriculum assessment and pedagogy with respect to 21st century skills. Very importantly, the resources that we've been able to develop have focused on skill development frameworks, and I'll come to a bit of discussion in detail about this later on. But what's important to note is that we've been able to take a skill such as, say, critical thinking, and we've been able to divide that up, break it apart, and say, these are the components that comprise critical thinking or creative thinking or collaboration. And from these basic definitions and structures, we can then go into further granularity and detail to then identify how these components can be measured, identified, and observed in the classroom. So this is what our skill development frameworks focus on. We've also looked at skill development levels because, as we know, these skills will develop over a period of time. People, generally speaking, do not stay static. And then lastly, we've also developed resources around embedding these skills into learning outcomes, assessment measures, and teaching strategies. Basically ensuring that we cover all three components so that we can provide policy stakeholders with the complete solution rather than something which is somewhat piecemeal in this case. Now, important to note is the fact that the central goal ultimately that we're working towards is to ensure that teachers are equipped to measure and monitor 21st century skills in their classroom and better develop these skills in students. As I've said before, we focused on critical thinking, creative thinking, and collaboration, but we've also started to develop frameworks around self-regulation and empathy, which we hope to progress further. All right, so a little bit more information about the course. As I said before, we focused primarily on policyholders, researchers, teachers, and stakeholders and NGOs. What we tried to do was to bring these people together within the context of the course to conduct a needs analysis on a particular country. So people applied to enroll into this course, say, for example, from Vietnam or perhaps Thailand. They would come together and we would assist them with conducting a needs analysis of 21st century skills within their education system. Now, the focus of this course was primarily on curriculum, but we also focused as well, if there was a need, on assessment and pedagogy as applied by the participants. The main output from this course was the development of the strategic plan. And this was critical because we don't want people coming into this course assuming that, well, we're just going to get some information and then go away and not do anything about it. The main purpose was to develop this plan to then be able to action this plan further down the track. Now, we're under no presumptions that the plan that was ultimately delivered and submitted is going to be the final plan. Obviously, there's going to be iterations of this plan to be further developed, but at least it's a starting point from which we can assist stakeholders to progress their 21st century skills agenda. Apart from looking at the various components of 21st century skills alignment, I think the most important thing to come out of this course was the fact that people gained significant insights from their peers in other countries about how they have been able to enact or how they were challenged to enact 21st century skills integration within their education system. So I think that peer-to-peer experience and learning was certainly one of the most important aspects of this course. And then lastly, the idea is that, of course, we want to be able to disseminate this knowledge. We want to ensure that the knowledge products that are produced as a result of developing these strategic plans can then be passed on to various groups via the KICS EAP Hub. All right, so when developing a strategic plan, as you might imagine, it is, of course, integral that we integrate 21st century skills across pedagogy, curriculum, and assessment. But these are very difficult tasks. I'm just going to focus on the last point there because I'm starting to realize I'm running out of time. Notwithstanding the primacy of curriculum as one purported change driver of educational goals, it is clear that there are other push and pull factors that policymakers will have to contend with when developing the strategic plan. What we saw certainly in our reports was that it's not just perhaps the educational history that they're operating from or the philosophy from which they're operating from, but it's also the research from which they draw from as well. In certain countries, religion is a strong pull and push factor in terms of determining the shape of their education system. So when we have to integrate the 21st century skills agenda, we have to consider how these factors will also influence the shape of our 21st century integration in education systems. All right, so when looking into this course, there were basically 4 steps that we tried to engender within people's minds. The first one was that we needed to establish a core strategy team. I've talked a little bit about that already. Step 2 was to emphasize a mission and vision statement and to ensure that this was clearly articulated for all. Step 3 was to ensure that people are using an appropriate skill development framework. The definitions they use are contextually relevant to their country or to their region. Step 4 was then to prioritize the alignment components across curriculum, assessment, pedagogy. Okay, so I'll talk about each of these 4 steps, and then I'll end off with some lessons learned and some gaps. So as I've said before, in a line system, educators with expertise in curriculum development, assessment design, and pedagogical strategies were brought together into a core technical team to formulate support structures and the substance to form a coherent approach. The reason why these experts were brought together across curriculum assessment pedagogy is because, as I said before, we want to cover these 3 components across the education systems. The assumption as well is that if we can provide them with 21st century skills expertise, then they can take them back to their respective areas and they can pass that information to their department or through their department. Number 2, the successful alignment of 21st century skills integration is contingent upon this group working collaboratively together and communicating their particular strategy to other stakeholders outside of this group. So they are the core team, they formulate the ideas, and then of course they pass that information out. And subsequently, the roadmap that they deliver should be actionable because they draw from these various streams of expertise. All right. When it came to the vision and mission statements, it was clear that, once again, there was a very contested understanding of how we might invoke and how we might define 21st century skill, mission, and vision statements. I think the next example probably best exemplifies it. What we have here is an example taken from the Brookings Institution study, where they looked at policy level documents. This graph shows that a majority of countries across 161 countries. Sorry, I'll say that again. Out of 161 countries that they reviewed policy documents from, 141 were explicitly identifying 21st century skills only in their documentation. And this was very broad documentation, nothing specific. It was emphasized perhaps in education sector plans or perhaps in amendments to legislation, but it was a very broad and generalized inclusion of 21st century skills. Only 57 of these countries identified specific 21st century skills in their mission and vision statements. 50%, which is skills and curriculum, embedded these skills into the curriculum. And only 12%, identified or developed these skills as skill progressions. So as you can see here, there is a gap in terms of countries being able to articulate clearly a 21st century skill, mission, and vision statement. And so our project was about increasing the explicitness and clarity with which these skills are presented. All right, moving quickly. Step 3 was to ensure that participants would have a good understanding of the skill development frameworks from which to draw from. And one of the frameworks that we used, and certainly the 3 that we used, were critical thinking, creative thinking, and collaboration. In this instance here, this is ACR's definition of critical thinking. At the very top, we have 3 strands: knowledge construction, evaluating, reasoning, and decision-making. And below, we have the components that make up strands 1, 2, and 3. These are divided up into aspects. And as I've said before, the primary goal here is to ensure that these are measurable, these are observable, and we can actually, importantly, see them in the classroom. Otherwise, there really is no point developing these frameworks. So these are the type of frameworks that we provided to participants. If they had other frameworks from which to draw from, that's fine, but at least they've got a comparison and a basis from which to start. Okay. This figure presents 10 recommended alignment components of consideration across curriculum, assessment, and pedagogy. And this was our attempt to assist them with aligning 21st century skills across the entire education system. What's important to note is that some steps can occur simultaneously, and most of them will be iterative over the course of this alignment exercise. So during the course, countries were guided to conduct a needs analysis, identifying which steps are currently being met and which need more attention. This enabled them to identify priorities for an aligned approach to skills integration, identified and develop a plan for targeting those that need to be systematically developed. Okay, so we would actually walk people through this process. For example, when it comes to curriculum and resourcing, there was an audit process there where we would ask them, how does 21st century skills fit into the curriculum when it comes to teaching and learning down below. Looking at reviewing existing and potential classroom activities. Once again, how might 21st century skills be included into this area here? Quicker now. This is a heat map that we use to identify opportunities, skills, and curriculum. This activity aimed to conduct an audit of the curriculum in order to generate a heat map highlighting existing presence of 21st century skills and curriculum documentation. What we can see over here is that we have literacy and we have English. And the 95 indicates that there is significant overlap between literacy as a general capability and English. Whereas in the case of numeracy, we have the number 3 to represent very low coverage of numeracy within the subject of English. So what this tells us is that if policymakers are looking to increase coverage of a particular 21st century skill or general capability within a subject, then they can use a heat map like this to very quickly scan the status of their education system, and then of course make changes as required. So we walked participants through this process as well. Another activity was to look at alignment from the perspective of the aspects in the skill development framework. So over here we have collaboration as a skill, and we have the lower level aspects 2.1 and 3.2. So the aspects of collaboration in this case can be mapped to learning outcomes in the case of curriculum, assessment, and pedagogy. And importantly, they provide policymakers, school leaders with a more manageable and sustainable approach to embedding this particular skill into existing practice. Importantly, instead of attempting to teach or assess the whole skill, which is collaboration in its entirety, educators can also focus on these specific aspects with a view to covering the wider representation of the skill as they gain expertise or over a period of time. All right, last 2 slides. This is an example of a strategic plan that was submitted by one particular country. And as we can see here, there was a clear attempt to prioritize certain events over others. So obviously starting the working group is most important. As a starting point, that was followed by reviewing and refining, ensuring that plan is applied and starting to become developed. But importantly, that there was also some version of advocacy as well. There was also a need to audit and map this plan across assessment, curriculum, and pedagogy. And then towards the end, the importance of development and capacity building for our own teachers. Okay. All right, last slide. We came away from this course, I think, realizing certain characteristics of education systems and indeed policymakers. The first one, as I've said, is that there seems to be very contested understanding and tangled understanding of 21st century skills. There seems also to be a lack of explicit articulation and integration of 21st century skills in curriculum, but especially in assessment and pedagogy. For most of the countries that we looked at, it was clear that 21st century skills made its start within the curriculum. But in terms of ensuring mapping and alignment with assessment and pedagogy, there was a lot left to be desired. So ACL hopes to help stakeholders with these gaps, with these challenges through the frameworks that we've developed. As I've said before, we've continued to research these frameworks and the emerging frameworks. And at present, we're testing our 3 frameworks: creative thinking, critical thinking, and collaboration within Australian schools. And then, of course, we want to ensure that we collaborate with organizations like this to get the message out there. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much, Ian. Well done. It was 17 minutes, so excellent work. We have time for, there's 2 questions in the chat, so maybe if we could just quickly address those. And the first one I'll ask you on the bottom, because it's been translated from Yuri Skiba. What technologies have you used to identify the dynamics of the development of critical thinking?
Good question. At present, I'm going to assume that you're talking about contextual questions. If I'm wrong, please tell me. The questions that we've devised on critical thinking do not focus on technologies per se. They're much more geared towards, for example, primary school or secondary school style critical thinking. So there may be a contextual question about refugees, for example. And in this instance, we'll ask a question about what should be done with the refugees, what are the various approaches that might be taken to support them. There might be very difficult questions that are asked. And based on students' responses, we then work out, based on the frameworks that we've developed, whether this is a very high level of critical thinking or something perhaps a little bit lower. So in terms of technologies, the answer is nothing yet, because we've had to start off with the curriculum. Thank you for the question. I'll just read the one on top.
Yeah, let's just do that one quickly. Thanks, Ian.
Yep. I have five references. Oh, okay, thank you. Right, so I think I understand what you're saying. So thank you for the question. Oh, it's Keenly. Hi, Keenly. We've met before. Yes, so you would know. The 10 steps are meant to be simultaneous. So it's certainly not the case that they have to be done sequentially. As people develop the alignment plan, as they go through various rounds of iterations and revisions, clearly the alignment plan will change, and we expect it to change. I think the worst thing that we could do is assume that by the end of this course, for example, the plan stays the same, because that's not going to be flexible, that's not going to be agile to the needs of the country. So to answer your question, we would expect that there would be changes, and that some of these would be simultaneous depending on the needs of the country. There is no yes or no. It really depends on the policy and contextual, cultural, social needs of that education system.
Oh, thanks very much, Ian. We have hit 20 minutes, so if I'm going to be strict about time, we should move on to our third presentation. There is one more comment from Mark Neeson.
I can answer that in the chat.
Okay, that's great. Thanks a lot, Ian. Okay, so our next question, our next presentation, Bahadur Mangliev will present on advanced training of teachers based on competence-based approach of teaching in secondary schools in Tajikistan. So Bahadur, thank you.
Sorry, the English sound is not working. Can we check if interpretation is?
I cannot hear the speaker.
Okay. Veronica, can you speak to Bahadur in the Russian channel? Bahadur, we cannot hear you, and I think you are.
Bahadur, вы слышите нас? Bahadur, ответь.
Здравствуйте, слышите ли вы нас? Мы вас не слышим. Может быть, проблема с интернетом. Напишите нам, пожалуйста, в чат, если у вас
Maybe there
есть...
is problem with the internet, Veronica says. So please write us in the chat if you have problems with the internet.
I think there might be a connectivity issue.
Veronica, can I recommend that maybe you share the slides and see if Bahadur can use, without the camera, can use the audio. Maybe it's pushing
Yeah, Bahadur just mentioned in the chat that he can hear us, but we can't hear him. So I think there is a problem with the connection on Bahadur's side.
Mm-hmm. Because it was working before he was speaking, right? Are you in which channel? You should be in the Russian channel. Veronica, if you can ask that he should select the Russian channel. Maybe he's in the off channel.
Еще раз проверим, Бахадур, слышите ли вы нас?
Can you hear us, Bahadur?
I think he's reconnecting. Yeah, he's reconnecting.
Should we go for the next presentation and then we go for Bahadur when he's back? I don't know, Elizabeth, your call.
Sorry. Sure. If that's probably a good idea, so we don't waste time. Is Angelica ready to present? Are you happy to present now, Angelica?
Да, могу.
That's great.
Yes, I
Thank you
can.
very much.
Добрый день, участники конференции.
Good afternoon, participants of the conference, dear colleagues. I would like to discuss such an issue, prospect of the market of educational services. Part of presentation will be connected to the situation in Ukraine. The other part will be review of the global practice. So I shall focus attention on that. Computerization, dissemination of computer technologies in the world require the new view on educational process, forms of adaptation, not to lose quality of education, and changes that we observe now are happening so quickly. Therefore, very often, not those who get service of education, those who provide it, cannot get adapted to changes. Now I shall give concrete example. I'm a researcher in economics and finance, and I am a teacher of engineering and pedagogical teacher. So I shall make focus on that. So to fit in the time provided to me, I shall focus attention at three issues. Environment in which we live, what are the requirements of this environment, and what to do. We shall try to find the answer together. Can you give second slide, please? Next slide, please. Theoretical knowledge is not in conformity with the practical experience. All studies prove that. All studies, at least, that we reviewed. The problem is how a teacher of the university can ensure modern knowledge of students if a teacher has no access to get practical experience at some practical enterprises or companies. Strong companies create their own educational space, innovational park. They develop their educational platform, their free online courses, and leading university of the world offer their educational programs that are also free of charge, accessible in the internet. In this slide, you can see three educational projects offered. They are quite modern. They will develop further in the future. Unit City project, innovation center created jointly with the Kharkiv Polytechnical University. It's a kind of hub, a cluster, which includes IT, learning, entrepreneurship, co-working based on computer engineering technology. What do you want the result? Merge of education and business, that students get knowledge and skills needed in IT technologies. What I want to mention, back in 2016, when I was president of the conference organized by Unit City, they presented 17 they had 17 biggest employers present there who were telling that they will create their own educational space. And I want to emphasize that their educational programs were already approved and licensed. These are bachelor programs offered for free. The only conditions, the graduates must work 3 years in Ukraine after graduation. Next project that I want to demonstrate launched on the 18th of October this year, Metinvest Polytechnica. In Ukraine, we have not state-owned educational establishment. This is a private project, first project of this type that will include mining industry focus. The practical experience that Metinvest company has jointly with Polytechnica, with the Kyiv Polytechnical University named after Igor Sikorsky, they will jointly with international corporations, Siemens and Schneider, will have this education course. They got the license from Ministry of Education for such subject as metallurgy, computer science, and mining activity. I want to emphasize that they plan to launch this course in 2022 and 23, and it will be free of charge. This is the environment where we work. Having this environment, it's very difficult to state-run educational establishment to offer their educational courses. We must offer such educational services that will be in demand in the market of paid education and state-run free of charge education market. Situation is getting, if not complicated, but it's getting quite serious. New report, next slide, please. Report was published that give us possibility to range kind of skills needed for students. Student skills required by potential employers in different countries, in different sectors of industry. So technological, social, and cognitive skills list is on the table. I should not read of them. You can read them yourselves. The only focus that I want to make, the skills that are additional to the list that we offer for different specialities. Next slide, please. What conclusions can we make? Skills that are needed and skills that we train, they are changing. Some skills lose their value, but new skills are demanded. From the point of view of a teacher today must get readjusted very quickly to put additional demands to himself or herself and be able to train proper skills of our students. COVID-19 impact also changed the priority of skills needed. Can you, no, this slide, okay, sorry, this slide. According to the report that I mentioned, again, we range skills needed in different sectors of economy that are of interest for Ukraine. What can we see here? What skills are required? First 5, advanced skills in IT, leaders, managerial skills, advanced negotiation, communication skills, project management skills. You can learn skills number 1 and number 2, But 3 other skills require subjectivity, entrepreneurship, initiatives. It's not typical for every student. You can even train skills of entrepreneurship, but the essence of entrepreneurship, the feeling of entrepreneurship, it's difficult to teach a student if a teacher of the university is not an entrepreneur himself or herself. She's not taking part in a business. As regards marketing, sales, healthcare, mixed skills are required. Leaders and managerial skills and advanced skills in IT and programming. Next slide, please. In-demand skills in 2021. I have not completed entire table of all countries. I show you only part of my study. If you take different countries, same skills are in demand, both in particular branches of economy and in different countries. Same skills, IT skills, programming, etc. Same as I had mentioned, communications and relations. Next slide, please.
Значит, согласно последних исследованиях, 60%
According to recent studies, 60% of employers
последствия COVID-19 связанные с ними кризисы, которые
we see the consequences of COVID-19 pandemic and economic and social changes. Such skills are required that can make staff be able to get adjusted to COVID crisis conditions, not to be vulnerable. More time is needed to acquire such skills. Resources are not enough because still a lot of educational services are not free of charge. But still a dialogue with university is going on. Potential employers try to create conditions in the universities that we train students for them. At least students go on practice to these companies, but still our level with potential employers is quite low. This slide shows the data. Sorry, they're not in Russian, but they are in Ukrainian. I wanted to show you the original slide from our study. It shows that before COVID pandemic, cooperation with different spheres of economy shown on this slide. Direct contact between employers offering attractive job to students are agriculture, pharmaceuticals, telecom, IT. They are most in demand for students. Students see them most attractive. These are the branches that are special sectors of economy. They themselves create educational space themselves. From economical point of view, not many companies are presented here, but economical sphere, mainly consulting companies are active in cooperation with students, tobacco producers like Philip Morris Company. Most attractive employers remain Rochen Company, chocolate producing company, and Philip Morris.
Значит, следующий слайд.
Next slide.
Я его объясню. Значит, это
Now I will explain
данные
what
рейтинга
is it.
Украины в сфере образования в
Data
развитии
rating of
последние
Ukraine
годы.
in the sphere of education
И не все, я
uh,
аспекты, ну,
in the
наиболее
light of
такая
index of
официальная
global
данные
compatibility,
конференции, и
data from World Economic Forum,
отражают идею данной конференции
2010,
и тех реформ, к которым мы
2019.
подходим. Значит,
So
это
data from the
исследование
conference and our
последние 10
data
лет
of this
говорит
study.
о том, что
Result of the study in the last 10 years show having the situation that we have now in conditions of very strong competition, still we have great opportunities in the spheres
более низких позициях.
that are at lower positions.
Высокий — это качество образования
The
в сфере
highest
менеджмента и
is
бизнеса.
quality of
Здесь,
education in the sphere of business.
исследование
The
производительности
study was conducted from 137 of 140 countries for the last 10 years. Positions of Ukraine, on the one hand, coverage with higher education is decreasing, and quality of education, where Ukraine was quite seriously the management this business, is going down. And now conclusion, you cannot be competitive in the educational market without cooperation with potential employers. Only in tandem with potential employers you can find joint solution, and you will educate a specialist who will be in demand in the market. And we should review our potential opportunities. Can we be in a state-run university? Can we be competitive with private innovational clusters that exist? In conclusion, I want to say, dear colleagues, a lot of work is ahead, dear colleagues, if you want to be competitive in the educational services market. Thank you for your attention. If you have questions, I will be pleased to answer them.
Thank you very much, Angelica, for that presentation. We have time for one very quick question. One came in from Yuri Skiba, but here we go. What mechanisms do you see for integrating state universities with business? And if you could answer in maybe 2 minutes, so we can go to the next presentation. Thank you.
Вы знаете, очень спасибо за вопрос.
Thank you for your question. I was thinking about that. Maybe the answer could be like that. We have a law of Ukraine on public-private partnership. This law was seriously changed in the last 3 years. Huge opportunities are provided to private investors as regards tax benefits and more profitability of this business. I'm studying all these issues in the recent time. That could be the way out to keep state-run educational system and attract potential employers. If it is not interesting from financial point of view, private business will hardly come to help us. only maybe if there is a charitable activity, they can help us. I think it's like that.
Thank you very, very much, Angelica. I see that Bahadur is here. Shall we
Спасибо
go for the
большое.
last presentation, please?
Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. Now I'd like to introduce Bahadur Mengliev.
Я представлю.
Здравствуйте, спасибо большое.
Yes, good morning. Thank you very much.
Вероника, вы мне поможете, по-моему, со слами. Изюмом. Меня слышно?
Can you hear me?
Да, мы вас слышим и видим. Слайды тоже показываем.
Yes, we can hear you, we can see you. So you can move ahead with your presentation, please.
Спасибо.
Thank you.
Спасибо.
Thank you. So, colleagues, talking about our subject matter, it's professional development of teachers based on a competency-based approach in our secondary schools of Tajikistan. Well, I apologize, I will switch the video off in order to improve my quality. So this subject matter, we had a project to develop it. It's very relevant topic, and I'd like to make a short introduction, giving you a very simple example. Like a few years ago, a very good computer expert, when we just started using computers and started the computerization of our schools, what he said that a computer without a human being is just a piece of iron. And the conclusion was that the school is not just a building, not books, not just books, but school is about teachers, human beings who teach. And of course, their level of their knowledge and update of this knowledge was actually the aim of the project. Unfortunately, his sound is not always good. Well, the project that we implemented in the Republic. The results were very good. We built a system of professional development for teachers. And well, again, based on what we had before, some legacy, but this time it was competence-based approach used. I will not talk about this specific approach. Let's move to the next slide. Yes, thank you. So, what did we want for our project? It was training, retraining, development of secondary school teachers' capabilities based on the basis of competence-based approach. Well, this component, this project component consisted, I mean, partially, just one subcomponent of the project was aimed at this kind of activity. But in course of our researches and surveys, his voice stopped. I cannot hear anything. Yes, and then we introduced it through a more comprehensive approach, not only in the secondary schools and professional development courses, it was also implemented into the system of higher the technical education, universities, so making sure that, well, we certainly this approach would have not only methodologies for retraining the school teachers, but also the teaching staff academy at universities. It was based on modules. The goal was to train 20% because in Tajikistan we normally cover about 20% of teachers with compulsory retraining, compulsory professional development. So we were expected to cover at least 20% to increase the effect of the project. So we intensified the mentoring and the activity assessment, and we tried to develop or finalize development of respective tools. Certainly, a certain economic basis was required for that, and we wanted to make sure that the whole system of professional development of teachers is fully covered by the project. Well, of course, the target groups were teachers, certainly the school as such, the pupil students, and even their parents to some extent. The peculiarity of the project is that initially we developed the modules and the system of teachers retraining and professional development had been covered by previous projects. The coverage was for first to fourth year of schooling for teachers, so we wanted to cover the whole secondary school, meaning the forms starting from 1 to 11. So yes, can we have the next slide? So theories of changes under this project is not a novelty, of course. It was continuation of the project that had existed before. And here, unfortunately, very poor sound. Sorry, his voice is really distorted. We cannot understand what he's saying. Here the word information and the shortage in the schools of this category. Sorry, his voice. So it was not only about the retraining systems and professional development for teachers. It was about an access to information with respect to the new teaching methodologies, new approaches, all these kind of skills required for teachers in order to draw attention and interest of their students. Can we have the next slide, please? Well, we conducted, our team conducted surveys, covered sufficient audience to confirm the outcomes presented. during assessment of the previous project, we could check the opinions, see what the teachers think about it, including secondary school, of course, higher schools, and we even included politicians and experts working in education, as well as other institutions, which helped us understand the real need of what we introduced into this professional development system for teachers. This diagram is about the results of our own survey. I mean, where we conducted some polling and questioning. These are the results based on 10-point evaluation system. These are the answers by our respondents. What I liked as a specialist, because I did take participation in the previous assessment. What I liked is that our teachers at this point of time, they certainly emphasize this mentoring support to the teachers. All of them considered this kind of support, mentoring support, very effective. That helps a teacher develop himself or herself. Because originally the situation that we had before was not that all teachers would be very really active in developing their own skills through self-learning, etc. Plus, we had this pandemics, and certainly the teachers would not, I mean, be really inclined, let me put it this way, towards their self-development. But as you can see, the final assessment of this project is quite possible. And so there is a clear understanding that it's important to ensure professional development of teachers, and the student-oriented approach needs to become a norm for any educational process, included, embedded into the teaching methodology. Some other points that I'd like to make. What makes me happy is that this methodology was appreciated by the teachers as a methodology which is timely and which is very understandable, which is important for purposes of this project, because during the latter years, because of many factors and literature, methodology, and maybe some distortions in the implementation of the methodology. Because of all that, there was some lack of this of understanding of this methodology by the teachers. So a decision was made to simplify, to streamline the basic lines and the areas that are supposed to be followed by the teachers in the classroom. Even, I would say more, we suggested, sorry, I cannot hear his voice, please. I can see the slide, I cannot hear. This is about mechanism of implementation and structure of course structure. So what we suggested for this project, as I mentioned earlier, since the retraining and professional development of teachers is a compulsory process for each teacher at least once in 5 years. then we can cover 20% of the teaching staff, but we plan to cover all levels of education with this project, so that this approach becomes really comprehensive and competence-based, and it should be accepted, I would say, also by those who work at the higher educational institutions like universities. Again, unfortunately, his voice is very distorted. So this is about the implementation of this notion into curricula, and we made respective calculations. As you can see here is the suggested cost for this project for full implementation is $8 million US. So what I would say that in spite of the fact that we expect very wide coverage, it's a bit ambitious approach, of course, challenging approach. So we want to ensure the coverage of all school teachers, but not only them, all education-related entities. So it looks like a bit expensive, but it will ensure very high effectiveness and efficiency of the teaching in schools. And actually, that's all what I wanted to share with you. Not to take more of your time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bahadur. It is exactly 1 p.m. In Geneva, but we have some time. We can take maybe an extra 5 minutes or so for questions. And does anyone have some specific questions for Bahadur or in general of any of the other presenters? Please enter in the chat. I guess I can ask a very quick question for Bahadur. What were some of the biggest challenges of your program using the competency-based approach?
Ну, как и всегда.
Well, as usual, as everywhere, there were challenges, of course. First, there are some traditions, that look a bit obsolete, and it's hard to change. Sometimes the minds of the scholars who were not welcoming, let me put it this way, this approach, because it was about changing their vision. I'm really sorry, his voice is very distorted. Well, but when you already launch this approach and you have new textbooks, new manuals, new curricula, I wouldn't say there were many people opposing, but probably there was some lack of supporters. But when we demonstrated the way the teachers change and the students change after implementation of this methodology, we started getting more and more supporters. because we developed a special methodologies and textbooks for teachers. Sorry, again, he disappears. Yes, a kind of methodological guide so that they can switch from the older to newer methodology. Sorry, he disappeared.
Okay,
Uh,
that's okay. Thank you. Are there any last questions of any of the presenters that anyone would like before we close? Okay, well, as the chair, I would like to extend my sincere thanks to all of our presenters. They were really terrific presentations. And I'd also really like to thank both Veronica and Jose Luis for all of their technical support and our translators. But thank you, everyone. It's been a pleasure to chair this session, and good luck for the rest of the conference. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Thank you for sharing. Thank you so
Thanks
much.
a lot, guys. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Спасибо.
Thank you.